Alistair. How you doing?
Good, yourself, Jenna.
I'm doing just fine. Enjoying the sunshine.
Yeah, really, what are we doing inside? Ooh.
I know. It's all
This is about our first day of above 10 degrees in a while.
Oh,
so
nice.
Ooh, that's really nice.
So I really should be lying down on the deck having a nap right now.
I'm so sorry to interrupt your schedule. I would love to be out lying in the sun. I actually opened up my blinds. My apartment gets really hot with the sun, but I opened up my blinds just so my cat could lie in the sun. Someone has to. So as folks are joining, I'm going to get started. We're still waiting for two more of our guest speakers. Alistair's here, and we're waiting for Bruce McCurdy and Pat. And I'm going to start up a poll. We've created a little question here just to see what you guys want us to focus on today. So I'm going to launch it, and you guys can vote on which section of the Sky Month by Month you would like to have the most focus. It takes a few minutes to get through all the options. Oh no, some of them have not appeared. Oh no. Well, I think most of them are there. The only one that hasn't appeared is the one where we wanted to talk about this year's highlights, but we're going to talk a little bit about that anyway, so no big deal.
And there's Bruce McCurdy has joined us.
Bruce McCurdy's joined us. We're all set. Oh, Pat's in as well.
Patrick is joining us. Oh,
He's in. Oh, he's in as an attendee. We'll sort that out in just a sec.
Pat Kelly's can't find the link.
Okay, I will. Unfortunately, it's a link just for him, and I just sent it out again, so hopefully he'll be able to grab it. We'll ask Bruce if he managed to get it too.
Righto. Hey, Bruce.
He's just still connecting to audio there.
He is, yeah. Here it comes.
And until we had, people are still voting, so we'll let people continue to vote.
I could forward mine to Pat Kelly.
So unfortunately, it's unique to each individual presenter, which makes it tricky because I can't just copy the link and send it out. So I forwarded him his join email again. So fingers crossed we'll be able to catch him. And if not, we can always promote him to panelist from the sea of attendees. We'll see. We just wouldn't get to see his face then.
What are we talking about?
Talking about Pat. Oh, Pat is joining now. There we go. We're all set.
There we go.
Okay.
So about this poll, is it going to be after the session is finished, or are you going to do it before?
It's going right now, so you won't be able to see because you're special and a panelist, James. So you're not allowed to vote, unfortunately.
I noticed.
I'm back.
What's that, Pat?
I think I'm in correctly now. Thanks for sending the link again.
No worries, we got you. Alrighty, so I'm just going to wrap up our poll now. It's been going for a couple minutes so far, so we'll see what everyone wants to focus on today. I'll share the results so we can see. Top of it is how to use the monthly event charts, and then a couple others, how to use the planet charts, a little bit on lunar phase, a little bit on Galilean satellites, sorry, and a couple on charts. It's a really pretty even balance, actually, which is great. All right, good to know. Okay. So welcome, everybody. For those of you who are following up on YouTube, we just did a poll. Thank you, everybody who's in the Zoom meeting so far and did that poll. So today we're going to be focusing on one of the most used, I would say, sections of the Observer's Handbook, which is the Sky Month by Month section. So that's where the handbook tells you everything that's going to be happening for the rest of the year, all the special events, what's going on with the moon, what's going on with the planets, all that sort of stuff. And for that section was put together by a lot of people, and we don't have them all here, but we do have a good number of them. So we still have James here, who is the editor of the handbook, and we've got Alistair Ling, and you guys are going to have to remind me of this each little bit that you did. Alistair, you did the moon images, right?
That's right.
Yep, and then Bruce McCurdy is here too, and Bruce, you did the text?
I did the text on the left-hand pages, and also am involved in the proofreading process.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And then Pat, you did the events, and also you put this together in general, right?
And the two charts, the one showing the magnitudes and the one showing the right ascensions.
Perfect. Okay. So these guys know what they're doing. and they much more than I do. So I'm gonna share the electronic version of the Observer's Handbook, and we're gonna go through together the various different sections. While I get that up,
Please
sorry.
reiterate that the electronic version is only for you.
Yes, sorry.
Nobody
That-
else.
So, and it took me a lot to get that copy. So just to make it clear, we do send out the Observer's Handbook with membership. It is a physical copy. Mine's only the 2019 edition, unfortunately, which is why I have the electronic copy, because I need to host this series and I left it at the office. Everyone else has their 2020 copies. Okay, guys.
You're locked out.
And I'm locked out, and we're non-essential. So no 2020 copy for me. I also have it so that I can share it in this live stream with you guys. We did once share an electronic copy of the Observer's Handbook, but we found it to be too expensive, and not enough people took us up on the offer to make it financially viable. So we no longer offer an electronic copy, but we get the actual copy, the hands-on copy, every year as it comes out. It comes out in October. So that's when you get it with your membership. And I will start sharing the screen now. Let's see. There we go. So there's the cover for those of you who don't have it beside you. I do recommend for this series that you keep it beside you if you can, follow along if you're able to. And with that, let's jump to the Sky month by month section. Anyone know the page off the top of their head?
94.
Thank you. 80. Oh my goodness, there we go, 94. Alrighty, the Sky month by month. There you will see many of our guest speakers' names. And I'm gonna open it first. James, do you wanna say a little bit about the section before handing it over to Patrick and everybody, or what would you like?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
This section, the Sky month by month, is probably the most intense of all the sections. There's so much information in here, absolutely chock full. And if anything you want to know day by day, not just month by month, is in here. Anything of interest, or what's deemed to be of interest, is in here. So, you know, if you wanted to know, for an example, if you're interested in variable stars and you wanted to check out the minima of Algol, all of those dates are shown in here. And we've got that updated information from the American Society of Variable Star Observers, AAVSO, American Association of Variable Star Observers, I'm sorry. So they give us that information, and Pat Kelly plugs that into the right-hand columns, and we got all the charts on the top left of each page are from that chart at the top left of the previous
Did I
page.
miss it? There it is.
That one. Dave Lane provides those. And we get the left-hand pages below that from Bruce McCurdy. A lot of study goes into this. We get the information on a lot of this from the Astronomical Almanac, which is published by the United States Naval Observatory and Her Majesty's Nautical Observatory in England. So there's a tremendous amount of work goes into this seemingly small section. It's a big section. Lots of info. It doesn't take up a lot of pages, but there's lots there. So I'm going to turn it over to probably Pat Kelly, because he's very involved in doing the right-hand side. Pat Kelly.
Oh, okay. Well, yes, as James has mentioned, there is a lot of stuff there. I think James would be happy if there was one event per day, but it doesn't often work out that way. There's often more events on one day. Some days have no events whatsoever. What we usually try to do, as he's mentioned, there's a lot of information that we get from various sources, is sort of narrowing it down to the things that people would find most interesting to observe. And the things that are sort of really noteworthy are usually indicated in boldface. So if you're just looking for the really interesting things that are going on, the boldface items tend to be things that are things definitely worth looking for. Yes, so for example, Mars being close enough to the moon that's being occulted. And for a lot of those occultations, there's a little footnote down at the bottom. You'll find that most of the time it does not include any part of Canada.
Gosh,
but since the handbook goes all over the world, that's one of the things that we tend to do, is make sure that the events are listed in there. The other thing that tends to happen as well is, even though the event is listed in boldface, the times that are given there are in universal time. And you may recall that Roy Bishop did a talk on that. And right now, since we're on, as I call it, daylight silly time, we're 3 hours off from that. So even though there are some events there, for example, that that are really interesting to look at, you may not be able to see them from where you are on the Earth, such as in Canada, because it may be daytime. Similarly, some objects, for example, right on that page there, if you look down at the 13th, you have Mars is at opposition at 2300 hours. Mars is going to be at opposition for really a week on either side of that. So some events, even though they have a specific time, they're still good viewing for some time on either side of it. Same thing with meteor showers. Some of the meteor showers are good on either side of the actual peak of the date. And then other things are such as when the Venus went through the Pleiades earlier this month. For those of you who were in a clear part of the country that actually saw it, that's one of those things where you just get the one night at it. And if you have bad weather, yeah, that one right there. If you miss that one, you got to wait another 8 years until it happens again. So there's lots and lots of stuff in there. Every now and then there's something that's both boldface and italics. So every now and then, for example, you would occasionally get, for example, 3 moons of Jupiter visible on the surface at once. That would get bold and italic. That's one of the things I don't really have to worry about, because I think the next time that's going to happen isn't until the year 2030 something.
Oh, wow.
So for the next 10 years, I'm not going to have to deal with looking for them. But that's sort of the basics of how it goes, of how that section reads. And the things that aren't in boldface are usually of interest. So for example, what we're looking at now, if you look on the 14th, possible occultation of Pluto by the moon. It's neat that the Pluto is occulted by the moon, but most people don't have a telescope. You'd have to actually go 3 or 4 days in advance to see if you can find Pluto in the first place, and then figure out which thing is being occulted is actually the moon. So generally the really neat things are the things that are in boldface, and we have to winnow that down. The listing that we usually get has all sorts of events, and generally we have to go through and throw a whole bunch of events out, because they either occur when 2 planets come really close together, but they're only 3 degrees away from the sun, so you're not going to see it, or that they're too far apart. So for example, generally if a planet's more than 5 degrees away from the moon, it's so far away that it's not really that special. It happens often enough that it's not really worth boldfacing or even mentioning.
So how do you decide what is worth it? What's neat enough?
Well, I have an entire single sheet of paper with a flow chart of what stuff I throw out, and another one on which things get bold-faced.
Oh, amazing.
And then usually what happens, and Bruce can attest to this, we sometimes have discussions over whether things should be put in or taken out, because every now and then I miss the odd thing. And it doesn't help that the software that is used to make this, Rajiv Gupta, when he was the editor, produced it. And I was glad to see that even Rajiv forgot that his produces a lot of stuff, but the one thing it didn't do is it doesn't do oppositions of Mars. So one of the things in my checklist every 2 years is Mars in opposition. If it is, I have to edit manually because it's not in this output. So it's sort of, you'd think it would all be it would just sort of flow naturally. And some of the other data comes from other sources. So for example, I see somebody's asked, what is Algol at minimum?
Yeah.
Algol is a binary star. It's an eclipsing binary star. So it's 2 stars in the constellation of Perseus, where very regularly, and you can see it happens quite often, what happens is the dim star passes in front of the bright star from our point of view. And in a fairly short period of time, it drops almost to full magnitude. You can literally look out, and once you know what you're looking for, you can look up and say, oh yeah, it's dim right now. And that piece of that information comes from a completely different source. That comes from Elizabeth Vaughan, who's with the American Association of Variable Star Observers. So she produces the information just for us, and it has to be included in there as well.
Oh man, that's a lot of work that goes into making sure you've got everything you need.
Well, that's it. Like I say, it comes from a wide variety of sources. Then it's got to be sort of sorted, and it's sometimes the information is not in the format you want. So in a lot of cases, you have to sort of strip off the leading zeros, because some of the data comes in with a leading 0 in front of the hours.
Mm.
So you have to go through and strip all the extra zeros off, or in some cases you have to add a zero in. So for example, the algol at minimum one, I think that one there on the 12th, I think it comes with the zero in it, but there's some data that comes in where it's just the hour and the minutes. And if it's less than 10, I've got to go manually stick the zeros in.
Oh man.
Yeah, but it's a lot of fun. I've always sort of enjoyed putting this section together. So when I finished my 5-year term as editor, I decided to keep doing some of the sections of it just because I like the actual physical and mental stimulation of actually going through and doing it. And I'm sure James is very happy that he doesn't have to do it, because when I took over as editor of the handbook, I didn't realize that there was a whole bunch of stuff in the handbook that the actual editor has to produce. And that was one of the things that I had produced. I thought Rajiv got it from somewhere else. He said, no, I do all that myself.
Woo. Oh man, that is good for you for doing this. I really like the way it's set up, and the information is presented really nicely. And we just had actually somebody in the chat mention this, and I relate to this so much. Someone saying, I'm sick of these things sneaking up on me, sort of thing. Like, all of a sudden, what? Oh, what? Venus is in the Pleiades? What? It's like tomorrow. But the secret is they can't sneak up on you if you have the Observer's Handbook. That's where all these people already know about this stuff. And that's what I find with our community too, is that people are like, yeah, obviously Venus is going to be in the Pleiades. And it's like, well, how did you know that? And the Sky Month by Month section is the answer to that question.
Real secret is you get on the production team and you proofread for next year's Observer's Handbook in like July of the year before, and then you're set for the whole, everything that's coming up in the following year.
You're making it sound like it's really fun to be on the editorial team. Is it fun to be on the editorial team?
It's a lot, Ryan. James is so good. It's worth it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Well, it's especially when you find an error that's been in there for like the past 7 years that everybody's missed for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
There's been a few of those recently.
Yeah. Oh, there's a perfect question for Alistair to answer.
I think Alistair wanted to get to that slightly later, so we might actually save that. Or is it time to start talking about the moon? Alistair, do you want to start talking about the moon? Alistair?
Well, first I need to unmute myself. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I've been a long time lunar lover, and it was a nice confluence of things where I had just begun writing software for viewing the moon a long time ago, back in 1995 or thereabouts. And one of our local members, Roger Fell, said, hey, wouldn't it be neat if we had little moon icons in the Observer's Handbook? And of course, someone said, well, you can already see, so to the very first line there, we've got first quarter, there's full moon. You can imagine what it looks like in between. And then someone else realized, well, it's kind of nice to have the icon there. It's not taking up any extra space. It was essentially a blank column. So it's one of those skill sets meets opportunity, and I ended up producing those. We went through a few iterations, which side of the page it should be on and that kind of thing. And then we very quickly ended up with the format you see here. The phases shown are every other day, and they line up with the time scale on the right. So you have to make sure that you're not actually looking, say, for example, halfway down the page, you'll see last quarter, and the moon phase right across from it is not last quarter. And that's because, as Pat was saying, the time scale down the left side of the page is not quite uniform, whereas the dates down the right-hand side of the page are perfectly spaced. So the moon phases line up with those dates in particular. Now, it's also very important to recognize that time difference, that everything here is in universal time. I like to explain to the new people that I meet that it's getting used to universal time is a bit like when you hear a sports event saying, okay, the big game final starts at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And most of us know that, oh, yeah, for Alberta, that's 2 p.m. And you know what your offset is from Eastern Standard Time as a TV watcher. And it's just exactly the same thing, except universal time is off of Greenwich in England. So for the prairies, it's 6 hours, at least Western prairies, 6 hours, sometimes 7 in standard time. But it's really useful to get into that. And it's really important because, say, for example, the date where it says 5.0, that will be because it's Greenwich is 6 hours ahead of us in Edmonton. That's 5.0 is actually the evening of the 4th for me here, and for all of Canada. Essentially, whenever you see a 5.0 or any 0.0, it'll be the previous evening. So that is something to be on guard for. Especially for lunar eclipses and that kind of thing, because if it's the evening before, you're out of luck if you've forgotten about that kind of thing. Has happened in the past, long time ago. In terms of what you see there for the phase, we've put in a fake Earthshine. It's not real Earthshine at all, but we realized that mostly without it, the diagram just doesn't look as nice. If it was either pure black or we left it out completely, then you get then it just disappears at new moon and there's nothing there. So we figured that having just that shaded part just makes it much easier on the eyes. But it's not a calculated amount of Earthshine that you're seeing. And obviously, when the moon is almost full, that little strip of Earthshine moon, say on the 11th, you're never going to see that visually. But it's just there as a quick aid to the eye. One of the most important things to notice about the phase of the moon is that for the very new people, they actually can get confused where they think new moon is the same as full moon, and that's not at all. So it takes a little bit of time to get used to. The idea is when it's new, it means there's nothing there, completely opposite of full moon.
So
The other thing I hear quite a bit is, say, for example, at well, first quarter, you look at the moon icon to the side and you go, but it's half. There's a half moon. Why do they call it quarter if it's a half? And it's that's the arcane stuff creeping in from a long time ago, where as the moon orbits the Earth, you can think of it, chop it up into 4 segments. And so the 4 segments are new, first quarter, second quarter, it'll be full. So we never say second quarter. Third quarter is when it's on the other side, and then fourth quarter is back at new again. So the quarter actually refers to how much of the circle has it gone around the Earth, and not a quarter of its phase. Or so the two can be confusing for the beginner at the start.
interesting. I actually didn't know that origin story. I didn't realize that was what the quarters came from.
The other thing that's useful on here that may not be noticeable at first glance is that the moon icons are actually different sizes. For example, the full moon here is, when you look at it, it's like, oh yeah, it's much bigger than the new moon icon. And so the things went into the, when we calculated the size of the graphics, we said, how big does the big moon get and how small does the small moon get, and then figured the right size of the average icon, so it'll swell and contract just as it does in real life. Now, interestingly, I just ran the calculations this morning that if you hold the handbook 90 centimeters away from you, that's how big the moon is in the sky. And you think, no way, that's way too small. No, it actually is. The moon in the sky is a lot smaller than you think, but that's actually the case.
Wow.
So the other thing that happens with the phases, let me just step back to that, is that the moon's one month, as Roy Bishop called it, that's the origin of the word month, you would think is 1 moon per month, and it's not quite. The moon cycles in 29.5 days relative to its phase. And so every month, the full moon date will shift back. So in May, it will be probably the 7th. In June, probably the 6th, give or take whether or not the month has 30 days or 31. But it'll slowly shift back. And at the end of the year, 12 moon cycles, we're going to be, ends up at 354 days, 11 days short of a calendar year. So the whole cycle of the moon will slowly shift up the calendar.
You can see that on the inside back cover. The calendar's got the new moon dates bolded. So you can see that exactly what you're talking about. Like in January, it's on the 24th, and in December, it's the 14th. So it gradually works its way forward through the month.
Now, one of the things that, oh yeah, I'll let you show there. And so if you're planning when you want to do your stargazing, that's the thing to do, is very quickly, in one glance, you get the calendar at the back there. But the other thing to notice relative to the size of the moon, it takes quite a few years of observing, but you can actually get used to it in the sense of, oh, the moon looks a little bit bigger than usual, it must be closer to us. Or, oh, the moon looks a little bit smaller. That takes quite a few years of observing. And if you want to do a test for yourself from 1 month to the next, just sort of slide the page halfway over. You can't do this digitally in front of us right now, but if you slide it over so you see the next month's strip and look at the size of the full moons, one of them is bigger than the other, but to the eye, you go, can't tell the difference between one or the other. But over time, say about 6 months later, the moon will be full when it's farthest from us at apogee, and it'll be, if you hold them side by side, you can go, oh yeah, that one's definitely bigger than this one. But when they're up in the sky, it's pretty hard to see that, oh, this month's full moon is bigger than last month's full moon, when you don't have that reference. And as well, number-wise, for fun, I did the calculation. Imagine you had, you're standing outside your front door. Across the street, the neighbor has a 14-inch pizza. Maybe it's a 16-inch pizza, and it's without having a ruler there, you might not be able to tell the difference whether that's a 14 or a 16-inch pizza. But that's about the size differences that the moon changes, but 30 meters away from you. And it's like, yeah, it's a bit surprising on how small the moon can get. Now I'm going to share my screen here. I should be able to. Oh, there it is.
I'll stop sharing mine so you can share yours.
That and that. Oh, I did click. Oh, it's spinning. But a little bit of my pet peeves here. Maybe I have to click it again. There we go. Screen.
All right, we can almost see your screen. Now we can see your screen.
And there we go. Okay. What astronomers love best? Cookies. This is a reminder for me of my pet peeve of the media hype you hear about. Oh, it's a supermoon this month. And I like to use the analogy of, grandma puts down a plate of cookies. Some of them are a little bit bigger, some of them are a little bit smaller, but is there anything on that plate that makes it a super cookie? No. And so that's about the size differences that the moon is out there. So I get a little, I get my knickers in a knot for the whole super moon and the 5 adjectives that we need to drag people out of their homes, and then they look up in the sky and, well, it looks like an average moon anyways. But
Alistair, tell us about little dots around the edge of the moon.
Yeah, we've had like
Oh.
5 questions about the little dots.
Okay, I'll get to that very briefly. I just want to make a plug for one of my favorite publications, the Astronomical Companion. It's as you can see, it's a very large soft cover book, and it has a whole bunch of neat little gems in it. If you can get it secondhand, that'll save you a bit. Some neat diagrams. It's stuff that they couldn't put in Terry Dickinson's Night Watch book. It's got just that little extra bit. And like the handbook, you don't want to go sit down and read the whole thing in one shot. But just closing in on the moon's orbit here, one of the really neat things is that it's got a bunch of things of the way it's shown is you think the moon does these twirly gigs down at the lower left as the moon orbits the Earth and goes around the solar system. But I'll leave it to a whole nother session about the wherefores and whys. But oddly enough, the moon never comes to a cusp or a wiggle in its orbit. It's always concave towards the sun. And it's just when you stretch out the whole scale, that's what we get. Now, the dots, the libration, what ends up happening is there's 2 things that's going on as the moon orbits the Earth, or actually as our pair of moon and Earth, double planet, orbit the sun, is that every now and then we get to see a little bit above the moon and a little bit below the moon. And also, as we do our dance around the large floor, we'll get back to my here. I'll start up the animation. As we move around the dance floor, the Earth and the moon bobs up and down very slowly. And hopefully there we go. And hopefully you'll actually get to see this moving. Are you getting the animation? Hopefully it's not just a black screen.
Yeah, we got a little bit of it. It's paused right now, or it's not coming through right now. Oh,
okay. Hopefully it will catch up.
Yeah.
But just like in the dance partner, one of them can be leading for a little while, following for a little while, and the rate of spin is slightly mismatched. And so from our perspective, it appears that the moon is tilting back and forth, up and down, nodding its head a little bit or shaking from side to side. So we get to see a little bit around the side, a little bit around the other side, a little bit over the top, a little bit under the chin, so to speak, but only by a little bit. And so this is called libration. And it wasn't really written down, scientifically speaking, or in any reference manual until well after the invention of the telescope. Now, the interesting thing here is that once you're sort of keyed into what's happening, for example, if you look at the right, Mare Crisium is tucked against the lunar limb, and as the days go by, it slowly shifts off the edge of the moon. And you can actually see this with the unaided eye, actually a little bit better during the day when there's not quite so much glare. But look at that Mare Crisium to the right, that sort of oval one. It just shifts back and rolls forward again. And so those dots essentially tell you which side is tilted up towards you. So you'll see, for example, now the dot is down the southwest at the bottom, and then it sort of disappears and shows up in the right, and that's the side that tilts back towards us. So also, if you're keen-eyed, the size of the dot in the handbook changes, and the bigger the dot, the more it's tilted towards you. And so at a glance, you can actually sort of flip through the months and see, oh, when is the eastern side, when is Mare Crisium going to be well tilted in? And you'll see, oh, there's oodles of space between Mare Crisium and the limb. So that's also pretty neat, especially when the dot is at the north or south at full moon. you get to see some pretty neat 3D effects there. So I'll stop right there. I'll take any questions, but just sort of realize that, as Newton said, trying to figure out the orbit of the moon gave him headaches. You could spend literally 5 or 6 sessions going on about the neat little intricacies about lunar motion.
And remember too, I believe next session, we're talking about eclipses, but we're also going to be talking about the moon. We're talking about the moon and the sun next session, I believe.
Something that we haven't touched on yet is eclipses. That's part of this session. And we're already over our 34.5 minutes. But I think Bruce McCurdy should have something to say about his left-hand pages.
Bruce, would you like to talk about your events?
Sure. I write the actual verbiage on the left-hand pages below the table. But I will draw your attention to the tables, which shows information for the 8 planets and the sun. A relatively recent addition of the sun, very useful as a reference frame for where the planets are in the sky. Each one of them shows on the 1st, 11th, and 21st the coordinates of each object in right ascension and declination, its distance from the Earth, its magnitude, how bright it is in the sky, and its apparent size as you look at it through presumably a telescope. And you'll see that every one of those pieces of information is constantly changing. Every 10 days, the planet is nearer or further, it's bigger or smaller, it's brighter or dimmer, and it's moving across the sky. So that's kind of the backdrop of information. The words below it just sort of give the, in general terms, first of all, specific information on the moon. We talk always about the librations that Alistair described can be explained by when the maximums are, when the greatest northern and southern declination is, when it's tilted up, when it's tilted back, or when it's tilted most to the east or the west. So we show the actual distances, or the amount that it's tilted, and also what date that maximum is achieved. We also give a little bit of information about the specific events like, well, the large tides that occurred this month. And that actually ties in with, on the right-hand page, when Alistair was talking about the larger moon on the 7th. Well, if we look at the words on the 7th right next to it, moon at perigee, large tides, which is on the 7th, and was at its biggest of the year. Then we go on to a few words about each individual planet, just saying which part of the sky can it be seen in, if it can indeed be seen at all. Is it in the morning sky, the evening sky, the overnight sky? Any sort of significant events of conjunctions between 2 planets that might occur. You might see sort of repetitive comments under both planets, saying when each is close to the other. We try and highlight the particularly significant events, especially the boldface, and especially the boldface plus italic event, like say a transit of Mercury, or 3 moon shadows on Jupiter, or those sort of high, sort of relatively rare events. We'll always back that up in the verbiage on the left-hand side. And we also have with each planet, I actually write them forward through the year. So I start with Mercury, and I do Mercury in January, Mercury in February, Mercury in March, and actually just follow what the planet's doing for the year. But you see it on the page of what each planet is doing in that month. But they each have their own rhythm. And one of the confounding things about it for things like boldface items is that each planet has its own personality, and it each has its own rhythm cycle, and it each has its own sort of accessibility. And Venus, for instance, the brightest planet, will be much easier to pick out in a twilight sky than some of the outer planets. So some of the events that we try and highlight, if you take a very specific distance. Say, well, we're only going to consider conjunctions within 2 degrees to be significant. Well, some conjunctions are different than others, and a conjunction between Venus and the moon that can be separated by several degrees can still be quite a spectacular thing to look at in the sky. So part of what I do in my proofreading function is go through the highlights that Pat has done and just make suggestions. Well, this is really going to be hard to see. I wouldn't highlight that, but there's kind of a cool event here that it's just outside the parameters, but let's bring it in. So there's a little bit of flex, in my opinion, that's needed there. I just want to point out a couple of little highlights about the handbook. Now, if you look on the corners, on the bottom corner of the book, see these few little pages that have the black. That's the Sky month by month section. So you can grab the handbook, grab one of those black pages, and you're right in the Sky month by month. And in fact, the black on the corner of the page is designed in such a way that at the end of the month, you clip the corner of that page. And then when you thumb the handbook open, you will automatically land on the current month. This is an old trick that's been in the handbook for many years that this old dog learned in recent years. Yeah, do that clipping. You can grab the handbook and instantly open it to the current page. So that's just a neat little trick that somebody invented along the way. And I will also mention, just following up on what Pat said about occultations, at the very bottom of the right-hand page, each occultation is shown as to where you can see it. So if, for instance, you're interested in seeing that occultation of Pluto, you'll find out that you have to go to the Antarctic Peninsula to see it. So it may not be on your list at the end of the day. So each of them, and of course we do try and cover the whole planet. So often it's good to look at the bottom of that right-hand page and just see, well, what do we got that's going through Canada this month, and maybe check out the details of whether that's something that would then be visible in your part of Canada and worth pursuing. And many of those types of events are just off the table unless you're a world traveler. So it's the information is detailed enough that you can't really fit it in the right-hand page. So we have this little table with a small font at the bottom. And basically all of this information gets checked off against the astronomical phenomena. I don't know why my camera is backwards, but astronomical phenomena, or even the astronomical almanac that James mentioned earlier, which is a thick, hard-covered volume that our information is arrived at and through a different program, but it should check off one to the other, and that's part of the proofreading. As I literally go through with a highlighter and highlight off the events in the astronomical almanac compared to the ones in the handbook, and try to make sure that every detail that we have in there is perfect. And it's a huge challenge. James will tell you, this is one part of the handbook where every single line changes from one year to the next. Every single piece of information in there would be unique to 2020. It might only be off by 6 hours from last year, which is basically the quarter day extra rotation of the Earth. But there's virtually nothing that stays identical from one year to the next. Is there anything at all, James? I can't think of one thing that doesn't change in the Sky month by month beyond the introduction.
Can I break in there, Bruce?
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, if you could just scroll back up to the previous page there, Jenna, right there, where it says under the moon, the libration at longitude, eastern limb is most exposed on the 12th. So if you go to the next page, you'll see the dot on the 12th, between the 11th and the 12th, is on the right-hand side. Well, does that look like it's east to you? That's the right-hand side, right? That's the western side, but not really. If you were standing on the moon, it's to your left. So we're using the moon's directions, not the Earth's. When we're talking about the libration,
Okay.
It's brightest on the left, or it's most on the left. That's if you were standing on the moon facing the Earth. The left is east. And if you're standing on the moon, facing the Earth or right is to the west.
This is one of these scenarios when it really helps to have spatial reasoning.
They used to just go by sky position, so that the right-hand side of the moon was more west than the east side, so they called it west. But then when they were actually sending humans to land on the moon, they realized that was going to confuse the heck out of them, so they reversed the coordinates and went with sort of typical terrestrial coordinates, as if you were on the ground looking down, as opposed to looking out at this object in the sky. So that was, the change came in the, I think, late 60s, right, when the NASA was preparing for the Apollo moon landing.
Wow. That's a ton of information. If anybody has any questions about that particular section or the charts or anything like that, please do ask them. But James pointed out that we have yet again gone over time. I expected it this time. I should have mentioned it. And we were going
to break away, Jenna.
Oh no!
I'm going to leave. Yeah, I got a delivery to the backyard. So.
All right. Enjoy your porch, James.
See you next week.
We'll see you next week. James is getting a new porch today. So in that case, we do any of you, anyone, Bruce or Alistair or Pat, feel comfortable talking about eclipses? Oh, resounding silence. Okay.
Whoa.
Oh, well, what do you mean by talking about them?
So I accidentally, well, I not accidentally, we included eclipses in this particular session, and I was going to have James talk about them. But we could scoot them over to the moon and sun session because eclipses have lots to do with the moon and sun. How do you guys feel about that?
Given we're over time, I think maybe next week would be the time to.
Next week sounds good. If you guys
belongs in the sun and moon section too, right?
Yes, it does fit. There was one last question that Pat said you were going to answer, which was universal time never changes to DST, correct? But you have to adjust your local time by an hour. So I'm not great with times. Pat, are you able to answer that one?
Yes, I clicked on the answer live button by mistake rather than typing an answer.
Oops.
But the universal time always stays constant. You then have to adjust it both for your own local time zone and whether you're on daylight time or standard time.
Okay. And
for
that's
large parts of the world near the equator, they don't do the whole daylight change things.
Right.
And if you're in Newfoundland or Labrador, then you have to, it's not just 1 hour because they're off by 30 minutes.
Yeah, they have an extra half hour, yeah.
So
and then some
places
places
where it's not just an even number of hours, you have to watch out for that.
Yeah, and some places do not follow daylight savings time, like Saskatchewan, I'm pretty sure, right?
Well, that's another discussion. They do, but they don't.
They follow only daylight savings time and not the other one?
They literally, if you look at the National Research Council, which defines the official time zones, they switch time zones.
Interesting.
Yeah. In fact, if you look at that map, you can see the reason why is that if you look at where Saskatchewan is, it's in the wrong time zone. It should be in the same time zone.
Oh, yeah.
And the section in the handbook on the sun, there's a correction there for sundials. And you have to correct your sundial based on how far you're off the meridian that defines your time zone. And for Saskatoon and Regina, that correction is over an hour.
Oh, that's
because
ridiculous.
The whole province is in the wrong time zone.
That's hilarious. Well, sorry, Saskatchewan. That's an interesting.
If I can say one more thing about the universal time zone, if for those of you who have a dedicated camera for astrophotography, you will find it really helpful to leave the time on universal time. And then that way, if somebody says, oh, there was a big meteor at such and such a time, if you know what the universal time is, you can go right back to the very particular frame and not worry about, oh, wait a minute, that was last year, and what was it, the early in May, or you know, and it's nice to have it. It's always universal time.
You don't have to change the clock in your phone or in your camera twice a year the way you do the one on the wall.
And you're going to forget at some point.
Yeah, that's right. So,
yeah, it's nice to set it and forget it and just make sure that it's on universal time and do the conversions later. It also seems to be the time in which astronomers talk to each other, is universal time. Alrighty, I think we're all set. The one last thing I wanted to mention, because I spoke briefly about these, were these two charts, which just tell you where the how bright the naked eye planets are, and then I guess where the naked eye planets are. And Anyone willing to tell me more on this?
I use Raji's program to produce these. The one you're looking at now is basically the magnitudes of the planets. One thing that's neat about both of these diagrams is if you have several years of the handbook, you'll find that the lines that continue off past December will pick up exactly where they left off in January of the next year's handbook.
That is very cool. Of course they would.
Venus is always going to be at the top because it's always
yeah.
brightest. And you can see that Jupiter is usually the next one down. But you can see that later this year in October, Mars comes literally out of nowhere. You see that Mars was very faint at the start of the year, but because Mars is coming up on an opposition, it's going to pass Jupiter in brightness in late September, and then very quickly start to fade away again. The really weird one in here is Mercury. And the reason for that is if you look at Mercury, it's the dashed line. Mercury moves very quickly in the sky because it's in such a fast orbit. And you would think it'd be really easy to see when it's at superior conjunction, which is the little SCs at the tops of all those little spikes where it gets really, really bright. The problem is when it's at that position, it's opposite the sun from us. So you can't see it.
Aww.
Behind the sun.
So the times you want to look for it is where it says either greatest elongation east or greatest elongation west, the GEE or the GEW. That's when it's farthest away from the sun in the sky. And depending on whether you're in the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, it means it's either far enough away from the sun that it's up above the sun or to the left of the sun so you can see it quite well. Or depending on the time of the year, it may be just to the left of the sun and it sets about the same time the sun does. And that's covered on the diagram on the next page.
There we go.
So if you look at this diagram, this shows you the sun, the position of the sun is that bold, thick line going from the lower left to the upper right. And the shaded band on either side is sort of the twilight area. And if you look at Mercury, starting at the very lower left-hand corner, you'll see that Mercury zigzags back and forth from one side to the other. And right there, you'll see it says FSH, favorable southern hemisphere. So basically, when Mercury comes over into the morning sky and it's well away from the sun, if you're in the northern hemisphere, you're out of luck. Because even though it's very far away from in the southern hemisphere, that means it's way up above the sun. From our point of view, it's basically going to be to the left of the sun and more or less at the same latitude or altitude as the sun. And if you keep going along, you'll see that the same thing happens later in the year. We have a really good place where it gets well away. And again, in the fall, it flips. When it's in the evening sky, it's favorable for the southern hemisphere. And in the northern hemisphere, it's only favorable when it's on the other side of that line, which puts it in the morning sky. And then each of the other planets sort of does the same thing. If you look, for example, at Saturn and Mars, or Saturn and Jupiter way down at the bottom, you'll see they don't move very quickly relative to the sun. They just sort of meander along nice and slowly. In fact, if you look at the very far right where those two lines almost meet in December, that means that those two planets are going to appear very close to each other in the sky. So whenever two of the planets' lines cross each other, they're going to appear really, really close. And if you look in the handbook for that month, you'll find the exact date, time, and how close they're going to get to each other.
And it's a very exciting conjunction, except for the fact that it's going to be relatively near the sun, right?
30 degrees. So
no, they're in the lower right-hand corner, they're well away from the sun. So if you go down to December.
December. There we go.
Okay, so
December 21st.
It's going to be within 1/10 of a degree of Saturn.
Oh, there's the bold italics.
Yeah,
There's the bold italics. And you notice that for us in Nova Scotia, it's 14 hours universal time. We'll be on standard time. So you subtract 4 hours, that's going to be 10 o'clock in the morning. It's going to be daylight.
Darn.
You're in Nova Scotia. Now, if you're on the West Coast, if you're in Vancouver, Alberta, it's going to, assuming you have clear weather, it's going to be dark out there because it's very close to the winter solstice. But for here in Nova Scotia, it's almost certainly going to be, I mean, you can still see it in a telescope, but you're not going to see it in a nice dark sky. Because
Right.
Saturn and Jupiter are both bright enough that you can easily see them during the daytime. Just need to find them with the telescope.
They'll be real close the day before and after. And that when they actually pass in conjunction, it says on the left-hand pages that this is the closest conjunction of these two giant planets since 1623. So
Wow.
particularly, that's why the bold italics. It's an extra. They only conjoin once every 20 years to begin with.
And remember
that's
that
how long it takes Saturn to overtake, or Jupiter to overtake Saturn.
And remember as well that the telescope was only invented in 1609. So that's pretty cool. Also, for reference, and we've talked about this in a few different webinars, but if you hold out your arm at full length and you hold up your pinky, that is about 1 degree in the sky. So they're going to be 0.1 degree apart. So they're going to be 1/10 of the width of your pinky apart at full arm extension, which is really exciting. It's very, very cool. I'm pretty excited for it, other than the fact it's going to happen in daytime.
And it'll be cloudy in Nova Scotia anyways.
Yes, it's December. That's the
And
cool
around
thing.
the Great Lakes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We can all be disappointed together. Oh man.
Well,
That's okay.
They'll be low in the sky, but the good news is that the sun can't get any lower than it is on December 21st. So the angle will still be somewhat favorable, and it'll be in the evening sky in twilight, but it should be readily visible to see those two planets together. And I'm quite excited to see this one.
It's gonna be a good time. There's one last question that we have, and then we'll wrap up because it is 4:30 almost. And that question that was for Alistair, who you had that video of the libration with the dots around the moon. Was that an app or was that just a video on YouTube?
That was a video of an app that I wrote a long time ago, and unfortunately, it's due to advances in technology, it's almost impossible to run that anymore. Yeah, sadly, that's no longer available, but I can post the link to that particular movie clip of that libration happening. But as Chris Vaughn showed in his Stellarium, you can actually center on the moon and have the time move by, and you can see it do the
wobble.
The wobble.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So yeah, give Stellarium a try. If you haven't checked out our Stellarium workshops, they are on, well, we hold them on Zoom, and they're on YouTube if you want to review them, and we go through how they're all used. The next one is tomorrow if you're interested. Sorry, I'll type out the name of Stellarium because it sounds like I'm saying Solarium. Stellarium. It's free. It's open source. It's great. And then you can also use the Observer's Handbook, which has all of that information in there too. Alrighty, I think that's it for us. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you Alistair and Bruce and Pat for all going into depth in your sections and explaining this, in my opinion, the most exciting section of the handbook, and the one that gets used the most. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to add to tell everybody? Everyone's happy? Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you again on Monday next week when we're going to go over the moon and the sun, and we'll throw eclipses in there too. Why not? We'll see you all next week. Thanks everybody for joining. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Talk to you guys later. Have a good one.
Okay, take care everybody.